My name is Todd Miranda. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use the target null value to handle nullable types in WPF binding. So let's take a look at a WPF project. We'll start in Microsoft Visual Studio 2010, and we'll choose File, New, Project, and this is the RC release of Visual Studio 2010. And we're going to choose a Windows project. Let's choose WPF, and let's go ahead and put this in the right place, and we'll call this HDI WPF, and we'll do target null value and choose OK. So that'll create the default WPF application template for us. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to our XAML file, and we're going to create a list box, something real simple that we'll be able to bind our data to. So let's go ahead in here. We'll create a list box, and we'll set this to xname equals list people, and we'll just set the width to 400. That just gives us a good width, and we'll create our list box that way. Let's go into our default template, and let's go ahead and let's just respond to the loaded event. We'll choose enter to choose new event handler and let Visual Studio create that for us. Let's go ahead and go back to our CS file. So a lot of times you'll have binding in WPF, and you might have a nullable type, and the nullable type is when WPF tries to bind that, if it's null, obviously that binding will fail because it's not going to bind a null value. So what will happen is you'll get nothing that displays in your UI. So it's just like binding to nothing for that particular case. If your layout is kind of dependent on binding some of those values in there, that can seem a little odd, or it can actually cause the layout to not work the way you want to, or at least for the data to be sometimes confusing. So in the past, what we've done in a case like that is we'll go in and we'll create a converter. So we'll do a value converter, and we'll check for null in the value that gets passed in. And if we get a null value, we'll just send out of our converter some kind of default value that we want to use to display if the value is null, and that'll pretty much take care of binding that null value. But we've got a new thing that we can use now in our binding called target null value, and that allows us to specify a value that we want to use if the target of our binding is null. So let's create a class that's got some information, and it's got a nullable type. I'm not going to create anything very complex because we won't need it for purpose of this demonstration. So let's just create a public class, and we'll call this person. And let's go in and create some properties. Perhaps we've got a string property, and this is first name. And obviously this doesn't affect strings because your default value for a string is going to be an empty string. So you actually get something you can bind there. So this won't work if you're thinking about the fact that you can handle creating an instance of a class where you don't specify the value of a string property. Well, that defaults to an empty string. So I was talking to someone the other day about that, and they couldn't figure out why the target null value wasn't working. So keep that in mind. So we've got a first name, we've got a last name, and got some properties here. Let's add an age property, and this will be a nullable age. So let's do we'll have a nullable int, and we'll specify that that property is age. Oops. And let's do a get and set accessor. So we'll do get, set, and that's pretty much all we need, I think, for that person class. Pretty basic class, and we're going to go into our window class, and let's just create a variable that we'll be able to use here. Perhaps we'll do a list of type person, and we'll just call that LST. So we can use that in our code. So let's go into our constructor, and we'll create a couple of instances of this new list. So we'll do list equals new list person, and then we'll do list.add new person, and let's specify our first name equals John, our last name equals Doe, and perhaps we'll go ahead and do an age equals, let's do 34. And then we'll add another list.add new person. And let's come up here and close out our add. Be a little bit better. And we'll do first name here equals, let's do Jane, last name equals Doe. And since it's not nice, not polite to ask a woman their age, we'll not ask Jane how old she is. So how about that? So Jane Doe, we won't specify the age for Jane Doe, so we get a null there. And we'll just add one more just for good measure. List.add new person, and we'll do first name equals, and we'll do Jack, last name equals Frost, and age, we'll say Jack Frost is pretty old. Probably a lot older than that. So in our window loaded event, let's go ahead and just say list people dot item source equals our list. All right, pretty straightforward there. So let's go back over to our window.xaml and let's go into our list box and let's go ahead and create a template for the items that we're going to display. So let's do list box dot item template, and this is going to be a data template. And in our data template, we'll have a stack panel, perhaps orientation equals horizontal. So we can lay this out horizontally for each person. And we'll do a text block, text equals, and we'll just keep all of this real simple. So we'll do binding path equals first name. And then we'll put another text block. Obviously there's other ways that you could do this, but we'll just kind of go the easy route and use a text block to put a space in there. Text equals, and we'll do binding again. This will be bound to last name. And let's go ahead and put another, maybe this time we'll put a comma and a space, and then last but not least we'll bind to age. Alright, so let's take a look at what this would look like just like this if we go ahead and run this. So it'll be our list box. Let's just build and run that, see if we have any errors, and if not, we'll see how this looks without our target null value. Okay, so we get what we had talked about. First and last name, we get an age, first and last name, and since it couldn't bind the null value, it effectively gets skipped from the UI or binding perspective, and then we get our last name as well. All right, so let's go into our age, and now let's add our target null value. So let's go ahead and do target null value equals, and I'm going to specify a string here that we're going to output, and let's just do age unknown for our target null value. So all we did was we added just another value in our binding statement called target null value and specified that its value was going to be some string that we were going to output in place of the age if the age was not specified by the user. And we'll run that again. And there we are. Here's our first name, last name, age, and for Jane Doe, obviously we get this string age unknown instead of our value. So this is a lot easier than having to go into a value converter, build a value converter for this, and just check for the null value of age, and then send back age.unknown. We can do it directly here in our markup. We can do it directly with a single extra value specified in our binding statement. much more simple and also much more easily toolable doing it this way, since you can specify it directly in your markup as well. Obviously, we could specify this in our binding for if we were doing this in our code behind as well. So you don't have to do it here in markup. You can also do it in your code behind. But a much easier way to handle null values in our binding.